My dad was a violent alcoholic, and so I didn't really want to have anything to do with him. We kind of had our last run-in when I was about 13, and I left. My three older sisters had already left. They had gotten married at very young ages, and Ma was hanging on to the marriage because of the family. So when I left, I said, now you need to leave too. It's a dangerous situation. And so that's what I did. I was blessed through some athleticism to have an opportunity to go to college, the first one in our family to attend college, and worked on the next 15 years just doing everything opposite of Dad, staying away from alcohol, wanting to have a happy and healthful marriage and family, and just wanting nothing in common with Dad whatsoever. And that worked out fine. I graduated from college, jumped on the bandwagon to make a good living, met my lovely bride and married, and had two kids. That's what happened in about 15 years down the road. Dad did not come to my high school graduation, college graduation, any of my tennis matches during college, didn't come to our wedding. But about 15 years later, my daughter was born, and I realized that in all my efforts not to have anything in common with Dad, all of a sudden I was a dad, and I had something in common with him. And I made a call. I said, Dad, you want to come down and meet your granddaughter? And he said, yeah, I'd like to do that. Blew me away. And so he did. He came down, and we lived in Midland, Texas at the time. And he met our daughter, and it was a blessing to have the time with him. But I made an intentional effort to take him down to Fredericksburg at that time. There's a pretty rough museum called the Nimitz Museum. It was a tribute to the South Pacific Theater in World War II. And you see, my dad was a Hellcat pilot off of the USS Wasp in World War II. And during that visit, we toured, and that time it's quite a nice museum now if you get a chance over in Fredericksburg, but we're talking 1987. And we walked through that museum, and it was the first time that I had seen any glimpse of what had happened. He never talked about the war. One video in particular, there was some shots of Hellcats taking off of the aircraft carrier, and at the end of the aircraft carrier there was a sign saying the enemy is indeed this far away, not what we anticipated. And never mind that the distance exceeded the range of your aircraft. You had to go anyway. And then you're coming back from a mission on fumes, looking for a postage stamp in the South Pacific to land on, and you're watching your buddies go off in the ocean and no chance of survival, and you survive. And I was convicted that if I had to do that in my early 20s, I may not have been able to get away from the alcohol either. So I asked Dad if he would forgive me for judging him. You see, I had judged a man I had no right to judge. And he said, sure, I forgive you. Now, would I have liked him to ask forgiveness for all the abuse that we had suffered in our home growing up? Yeah, I would have, but it wasn't about him. You know, it was about me. We can only change one person. And when he granted that forgiveness, then I felt like I had honored him because I had sought forgiveness to judge a man I had no right to judge. And that opened the door for a relationship. We weren't going to be best buddies, but it did open the door for a relationship. And he got to know his granddaughter, and he got to meet his only grandson a couple of years later. And so with that, I'm convinced that the Lord gave me an opportunity to embrace the fifth commandment, to honor your father and mother, or your years would be long, because I'm sure that it's through that process that has opened the door and opened my heart to a relationship with my kids that I want to have. They both know the Lord, and they know us in our marriage. And Dad passed in 1994. At that time, our son was 6 and our daughter was 8. And so he did have a chance to get to know his grandsons and his granddaughter. And I, in my walk, that has been instrumental in my understanding of how the Lord works. You know, everybody says, well, Jesus never talked about that middle commandment. I said, but he talked about loving God and with all your heart, mind, and soul, loving your neighbor as yourself. He walked the fifth commandment. He honored his father every morning, every time when he said, "This is for your glory, Dad." And that's what I'm doing. As I look in my son's eyes, I know that that's the relationship Dad would have liked to have had with me, except a thing called World War II brought a man back different than when he left. And as a cocky teenager, I didn't appreciate that. And that cost us 15 years in relationship. And my encouragement is, don't let 15 years get away. If you have not reconciled with your dad, or if there's any rift at all, reach out, honor your father this Father's Day by saying, "Hey, I love you, and I'm proud to be your son. I know you're not perfect, but I know you've done the best you can do with the cards you were dealt, and I can never walk in your shoes, but I do honor you."